retrieving those funds for a 10% cut. So looks like they're still working on trying to retrieve those funds. I'm not sure if that is the latest information, but that's the last thing that I saw.
Awesome. Okay, so I've got us fired up again, Mikhail, on StreamYard. If you want to join that one again, I'll add you. But now we are live. So sorry for the Twitter Spaces people. Just a quick recap here for everybody else watching live videos. It's FU Friday. We're here with a special guest, Mikhail from CERTIC. Super excited to have him on. We're talking a little bit about, just some of the shenanigans that happened in the space over the last week, and maybe some of the fallout and what we can do better as builders. It's a live show Monday to Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. You can tell because we have technical difficulties occasionally. Like, share, subscribe, help us spread the word. Super pumped to share the news and insights with as many people as possible. And now we've got Mikhail on video, so we are cooking with fire here. Super excited. All right, let's get back into it. So quickly, just kind of to build on what you were saying there. So Viper, programming language that not that many people use anymore for smart contracts. What does that tell you? Does that tell you like it's just an artifact of an early protocol that the keys were burned, so they can't really do much to it, or kind of what do you take from that?
Well, the biggest question is these entities that are creating these languages for smart contracts, do they need to have a third-party audit? And the reality is a lot of them don't. Like, for instance, I don't think Solidity went through a third-party audit. You think about it, like, why would they? They're the ones that created the language, right? So how are you going to hire a third-party auditing firm to come in to do an audit of something that they know the best? So it does raise a question, even though you may be the expert in that specific language, but do you need a third-party auditor to come in to learn it first and then conduct the audit? And then the whole conversation on audit is, that's a different topic that I also want to touch on.
Yeah, we can definitely dig into that together here. I mean, I think the same way that we have code reviews internally, like nobody ever pushes anything without arm's length code reviews, at least. Even if they're internal, it's someone that's not necessarily on said project, so they don't have any, they don't have any preconceived ideas of what should or shouldn't work already. We do that internally all the time. I'm sure you guys, before you push out audits, they go through a whole bunch of people's code reviews and so on and so forth. Why these programming languages don't have third-party audits is beyond me. I think that's just common, DevOps. Like you should have reviews and checks of your code before it goes live. One quick question though on this one, in particular, is was this vulnerability not figured out a while ago? Like, is this not something that we kind of already knew about and just no one had zoned in on it with respect to Curve until now? Or do you know anything about that?
I don't, but I think the fact that it was only used like 5% of the time, I think that kind of speaks for itself, that it wasn't a very common language that is being utilized. I know on the security side, whenever we get requests for audits, 99% of the time it's Solidity. Because that is the most common language that is being used. So I don't know if the fact that it is not being used quite, often, if that had anything to do with the exploit potentially, but it's not very commonly used.
Okay. For some reason, I had thought I had read somewhere, and we actually reported on an article that suggested that it was, and this was early on, so it could have been in error, that it was a known vulnerability. And then obviously I spouted off on that because that is exactly why auditors exist. If there's it's very difficult for builders and entrepreneurs to have an ongoing tally of every possible, risk vector, so to speak. But auditors, that's their main business. That's your main business, is to understand, what has led to all of this stuff in the past and make sure that protocols can't do that again in the future, obviously. So one of the big impacts of this stuff, Mikhail, and I think this is maybe where we can nerd out a little bit, but one of the, so you have these events, security events. Apologies for the background noise. Of course, they're vacuuming outside my office right now. But anyways, one of the things that is really exciting about blockchain and crypto in particular, and blockchain finance, et cetera, is composability and interop. right? So being able to do all of these, Lego block type workflows is really exciting. That's really one of the things that leads to incredible efficiencies and a lot of trustlessness in kind of what you're building and the workflows that you're using. One of the downsides to that is contagion. And so, what has this meant now for Curve in general, Aave v2, and a whole bunch of other DeFi? I mean, there's a lot of hyperbole going around, so hopefully we can dispel some of that myth. But there's been quite a few people on crypto Twitter, if you're doom scrolling, that suggest this could end DeFi. The contagion could be bad enough to end DeFi. I totally disagree, but I'd love to hear your thoughts from a security perspective on contagion and what that makes you think.
Yeah, I mean, Curve is obviously one of the biggest players on Ethereum, so I can see where that's coming from. I don't think it'll be the end of DeFi, but I think it poses the question of what is it that we need to change about auditing. And this is just my personal opinion, not speaking on behalf of Certit, but when you use the word audit, what does that make you think? To me, it's something that is regulated, right? You have a restaurant, and an inspector comes in and they inspect the status of your restaurant, right? See if it's any good, and then you pass or fail, which is a very big misconception in the cybersecurity space, that if you go through an audit, you either pass or fail. We don't have that. We have certainly we have different benchmarks that you have to meet in order to avoid certain risks, but we simply just tell you the state of the smart contracts, right? Or the code itself as a whole. We don't have any kind of bars that we're setting of pass or fail. And so this begs the question, do we just need to do a better job of educating people, or do we really need more regulation in this space? And I'm thinking about this logically, not emotionally. So I'm not like pro more regulation or anti, but there's only two options here. We either become more educated, which still don't think that we would fully be able to avoid these issues, or the other side of it is we need more government regulation in place, and perhaps we do need them to work closely with the cybersecurity firms and say, hey, look, these are the certain standards that these protocols need to meet. Are they meeting them?
Let's unpack that a little bit. I think that's interesting. Can you maybe give an example of where you think that? How could you educate let's assume I come to you and anybody that's listening, if you're considering getting audits or whatever, we come to an audit firm like yourself. What types of education do you think would help? So as an example, and I think you're right, the common conception in the space is you get a third-party audit, then all the risk is on them, which it isn't, and that they're going to check everything and they're now liable for any errors that you made. And that's actually not the case, but maybe you could help explain kind of what education would look like, what people should be thinking about the audit process, and how users, even if you're not a builder, how should a user approach audits and the narrative around audits in terms of their research and confidence level?
Yeah, I mean, tons of education that needs to occur in this space, and I don't think it's a easy answer. If it was, I think we'd be doing it. Everybody in this space would be already doing it. From a user perspective, the need for being able to read a smart contract audit report, right? So a user needs to understand that just because a protocol went through an audit, that doesn't mean that everything has been audited. There are a lot of projects that will come to a security firm, they'll get an audit, and they may audit one smart contract out of 4. But what about their front end? What about their back end? There's just so many other areas where if you have a malicious, intent, you're going to find a way to exploit that specific protocol. It doesn't have to be within the smart contract. So, how many of these protocols are actually doing a top to bottom full security? Bless you.
Man, I only made it to mute on one. Sorry.
You're working to what I'm telling you. Is that what it is?
It's making me sick just hearing it. But yeah, I mean, that's a really important piece. Our engagements with auditors, generally speaking, have been a little bit more of like a collaboration as opposed to a one-off project. And that's not every auditor. That's not every audit we've ever got, of course. But often we pay monthly retainers to audit firms so that we're constantly reviewing what we're doing. We're constantly reviewing any existing or new exploits. We've got someone right away that's constantly giving us feedback on that stuff. We also have private auditors that we use for everything first. So we audit everything with private auditors first, which are people that we've known for a while that are arm's length from our companies. And so for us, it's been pretty important to not only look at smart contracts, but front end, OPSEC, back end. There's a lot of potential vectors, especially in a space where the stakes are high. I mean, you can steal a lot of money and with a lot less risk than robbing a bank in the 50s. So, it's a lot more return and a lot less risk. As you can imagine, there's a lot of people globally trying to do this. Another thing that I think that leads to a lot of these problems is code repositories. A lot of people are using open source toolkits and code kits and so on. Do you have any thoughts on how, some of the dependencies in there and references to other code packs and so on, how that can lead to errors also, and how you guys help mitigate some of that?
I think with open source code base, one of the best ways for you to stay on top of the security is doing something like a bug bounty. Get the community involved. If it's open source, give them the opportunity to find these vulnerabilities and make sure that the incentive is there, because we're seeing what happens if the incentive is not. A lot of very talented hackers, they might have a good intent, they might have a bad intent. What's going to determine that? A lot of times it's the incentive, right? What's the risk reward trade-off there? And so when you do something like a bug bounty program, you want to make sure that you keep that in mind when determining what that reward is going to be. But I think for open source code, that's essentially the whole purpose of blockchain technology, right? Full transparency. And so in order for you to stay on top of that, having a bug bounty in place, I think is a great way for you to engage with your community, have that sense of transparency, and get them more involved in what you're building.
Absolutely. I think, again, we've worked with Immunify for bug bounties for many different protocols, and there's other groups out there that are great, of course. But the rule of thumb for us has always been roughly 10 to 15% of TVL should be the bounty to a certain maximum. And the reason for that, the logic behind that is statistically, if you're to do a black hat exploit, you're only going, after fencing and washing and getting all the assets out eventually into fiat, you're going to end up with maybe 10% of whatever you exploited. So the idea is, if you offer a white hat opportunity that's as good or better with no legal risk and gangsters wanting to hunt you down and find you, which is a real thing, then the bug bounties are definitely a good way to go. So what about, I'm going to kind of change gears a little bit. We'll still talk about auditing here for a minute, and then we'll move on to base for a few minutes and talk about some of the fun that was had there this last week. But in terms of audits, another thing that a lot of people, I think, run into when you're considering launching protocols and technologies is the cost of audits on the surface is pretty high. Right. Generally speaking, the cost of an audit to a new development team that is, trying to bootstrap a protocol is going, holy crap. In my opinion, it's non-negotiable. But from your perspective, I think, can you help understand kind of what the costs associated with an audit are and what makes up those the pricing structures, just so that people know it's not arbitrary? Because it sometimes appears that way, right? So some guys will say, oh, well, we reached out to XYZ auditor and they told us 125 grand without even learning about the project. Fair. That's maybe not an auditor that you want to use. But you guys, on the other hand, you go through a fairly deep investigative process to price things out. Maybe you can help explain that so people can understand kind of what to expect and what you should be looking for in audits and KPIs.
Yeah, I think a big red flag is anybody that can, just based off of you saying, hey, I have a smart contract, X amount of lines, staking pool, smart contract built on Solidity. How much is it? And anybody that can just throw out a number, like I would be very cautious about working with them. So you want to work with somebody that is going to take the time to look at the code base. Now, I realize that sometimes the code base might be sitting on a private repository. So certainly, if that's a concern, you gotta put an NDA in place, make sure that the auditing firm has a username and email associated with the GitHub or wherever it is that you're storing your repository. So that way they have access alone. And then give them the opportunity to, take a look at the code base and come back with any questions they may have about what you have built. One, it will give you a more accurate estimation in terms of the quote. And then two, it'll also give you the opportunity to see how serious is this firm about working with you. Like, are they coming to you with questions? Are they excited to work with you? Are they asking you, okay, like I see that you built this out, like what's the purpose of it? So it's a very good way for you to gauge who you want to work with. And I realize that we're living in this digital world where everything is done on Telegram and it's just like, hey, I need this quickly.
Everybody needs it yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Like they need an audit, but they need the audit report tomorrow.
Yes.
Right? That's always how it is.
Everybody and their mom, for sure.
So, okay. So what are some of the things, like, again, I don't want to get into, pointing fingers at other firms, obviously. But what are some of the things that you think differentiate audit firms? I mean, there's some that are extraordinarily expensive. There's some that are extraordinarily cheap, and everything in between. And so generally from your perspective, again, maybe not speaking specifically about Certic or anybody else, what do you think, are critical components of an audit firm, and how do you kind of figure that out as a potential client early on in the process, other than what you've just said, meaningful engagement on the technology and trying to meaningfully understand? That's usually a good sign. What else would you look for?
Yeah. So if I'm a project, well, the first thing is the technical team. What's the reputation? So you may not necessarily know ahead of time how they will perform the work for you, but there should be some type of a track record there.
Yeah.
And so that's step one. I think across the board, the security space is becoming very competitive, and there are a lot of great, talented, smart engineers out there that will be able to provide a good quality audit for you. So then the question is, okay, what's next? What can you get outside of just a sound audit? Can this audit take me to the next level? Is this the difference between me getting investor A or investor B because of the reputation of the auditing firm that you're working with? Is this auditing firm going to be around in 2 years? These are the questions that you have to ask. We're especially right now, we're in this bear market, deep freeze. And so there's a lot of people struggling right now, and security firms are no different. Some of them are struggling. And so you want to
probably impacts, sorry to interrupt you, but it probably impacts service businesses as much or more, because what's the first thing we all do when, the market turns? We cut burn as best we possibly can without laying people off. It's the first thing we do. And not that audit should be a thing that is cut from burn, in my opinion, but it is a big ticket item, and it often is something that people seriously debate, and I think unfortunately make the incorrect decision a few times. Again, you can have all the audits in the world and there can still be an exploit. We're building novel technology. There's still vectors that you just couldn't know. But having said that, not having an audit, I think, to me, is negligence. Honestly, I think it should be, and probably will be at some point. It's regulated out of the space, I think. Go ahead.
It's tough, JD. When I first started in this space, I was primarily working on the security side, and these days I find myself working closer and closer with the VCs, because a lot of times during these current market conditions, that's what's going to dictate whether or not you have the resources to extend your runway, to pay your development, to afford a security. And of course, there are other ways that a project can get around that, like offering some B2B services. There's certain ways you can generate your own income and bootstrap, but the venture capitalists are still the target right now for a lot of projects. Like that's like the area that a lot of people are focused on right now.
Well, and VC, I mean, right now, and speaking from experience, we've been fundraising for different things for what feels like a lifetime. And it's definitely one of the more challenging venture environments I've ever been a part of. But venture investors are, generally speaking, a lot more sober about their view of the future than retail. And so, I mean, thinking that you're going to, and I've been guilty of this, thinking, okay, we're not going to do any VC investment. It's going to be only community retail sale. It won't be a VC token, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the community is a lot less objective in terms of, you know, have we bottomed? Is it a good time to start deploying? And so on and so forth. And so I think, yeah, to your point, VCs still hold a lot of leverage in the space. Hey, I think we can talk, and we will, a lot more about auditing. But maybe we can move over just quickly, considering it is FU Friday. And I've got a few FUs to say with respect specifically to base. So maybe kind of what is, you know, obviously we're all excited about base. I've been excited for base. I think it's a really important step, especially in America, for blockchain potentially. I've got a whole bunch of thoughts on that, but we could talk about that some other time. But the first week was interesting. You know, first 24 hours, I think there was 500,000 transactions, 200 million in volume, and a bunch of meme tokens. What did you observe? What did you see over the last week?
Yeah, I mean, I read headlines that they were having more transactions than Arbitrum, which, you know, Arbitrum had a lot of momentum, and base kind of stole a little bit of that. But what you see, and again, I'm approaching this from a security perspective, but a lot of these newer chains, if there's a lot of buzz there, there's a lot of scams there as well. And so,
especially early on.
Absolutely. So we saw this with ZK Sync, and we're starting to see it with base as well, like Bald Coin, for instance. You know, complete rug pull. And
they took out like 6,800 ETH. Like it was like $12.5 million in a rug.
Yeah. So definitely
that's a valuable rug. That's a pretty good
interacting with new chains, like especially, you have to be careful.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and this is not advice for anybody, it's my opinion, but I personally, and this, some people might not love this, but I don't do anything if there's an on team. If I can't meaningfully figure out who's actually responsible for my assets, if I deposit them into a protocol, I'm out. Like that's step number one. Obviously, there's a lot of people that aren't anonymous that still perpetuate these rug pulls, but a lot less. You know, so I think if you're going in these ecosystems, it's really good to look for potentially teams that are public that you can, you know, especially early on. Now, the flip side of that is, as a space, and I think this is everything that's wrong with crypto, in my opinion. I've talked about this a lot, but we're all still degens, right? So everybody says, ooh, these are going to be scams. Let's play the prisoner's dilemma and get in, make money, and get the hell out before the rug pull. And to me, that's like obnoxious, because what happens is we now hear headlines all over the place about all this nonsense that happened in base. It's detrimental for base. It's detrimental for the space. A bunch of people lost a buttload of money. Bald as an example, even before the rug pull. There was a handful of people that made crazy gains. Everything else was bots, and then retail. And retail's holding the bag. They all lost money. The rug pull was perpetuated because retail aped. And I mean, Bald, it's kind of cool. I think it was originally a nod to Brian, but I'm going to assume that you and I were also on the list of honoraries in the Bald token. There was also a couple other ones. What was, I don't remember now what they were called. There was a couple other meme tokens. You know, how would you suggest people can start to suss out what might be legit, what might not be?
I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat it. It's getting harder and harder to do that because a lot of these teams are anonymous.
Right.
And again, you can look at the audit report if one exists. The problem is a lot of times, a lot of these protocols are so early on, people want to ape in very early, and they're not really concerned about the security aspect of it. And even if you are, one of the biggest common risks is around centralization. And that risk looks a lot different for somebody like, say, Aave than it does for a brand new protocol, because the risk may be the same, but the intent is you don't know, right? The only way you would know is, and this is still not 100% fail proof, but if the team is KYC'd.
Yeah.
So if the team's KYC'd, they have a less likelihood of trying to do something to do harm.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that it exposes them to law enforcement, to, you know, if they ever did anything malicious. Like, to me, that's kind of been like one thing that I've struggled with in this space. And I've been a contrarian for months on this. I use that phrase a lot, but not months, years, really. That I just don't think that any business that expects to scale, that expects to get the respect of finance participants globally, could possibly operate under these types of conditions. Like, it's absurd to me that, you know, you're going to say, okay, this as an example, and not to pick on anybody in particular, because it's actually a great protocol, but GMX, like, so GMX to me, you know, mainly a non-team, few people know who they are, which helps. But you think you're going to, you know, be a meaningful long-term unicorn with an anon team, like, and you're going to get institutional adoption and all of that stuff? That's never going to happen. You're never going to get institutional adoption other than crypto native liquid funds or hedge funds. I mean, you're not going to get State Street coming in and aping in, you know, to an anonymous team. So again, that is one of the early philosophies of crypto, was anonymity and privacy and so on. And of course, I do believe in individual privacy, and I do believe, you know, you should have the right to be anonymous should you want to. I just don't think that we have to mandate that as being an ingredient for success, because I do think it brings a lot more problems than good. All of that being said, I think we've talked a lot about kind of potential exploits. Is there anybody you want to say FU to today? As we round out the episode. This is personal. This is personal opinions only, by the way. This doesn't reflect anything that any of our related entities think. But I'll go first. Please. My FU this week and every week is still to Gary Gensler, because I think he needs to get out of the way. And he hasn't done anything crazy this week, but it wouldn't be a good FU Friday if I couldn't FU Gary. And my second FU is to scammers. FU to scammers in new ecosystems, FU to scammers that are exploiting protocols. But they're going to exist. They do exist. Nothing we can do about it. So we need partners like CertIC and others to help us navigate that stuff. Any final thoughts, my man, today?
Yeah, I'll just say, well, I'm looking forward to more clarity. What that looks like, we don't know. Whether it's us just becoming more informed, or from a regulatory perspective, you know, really the clarity, it's inevitable. And I'm just looking forward to the day we finally get that. Seems like we have that with Bitcoin. You know, there's a lot of great news coming out for that. And potentially even Ethereum. I don't know if you heard the news, but potentially a spot ETF for Ethereum, which would be great. But, you know, for
we need the spot BTC ETF first, though, no?
Yeah. No, we can be greedy and want both, right?
At the same time.
Yes.
Ideally this week.
Yes. Ideally right now.
That'd be really awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm with you, man. I'm excited to see kind of what comes out of all this. Again, I've been a big proponent of regulation, believe it or not, even though it will. Well, my hair's already gone, so it's not gonna take any more hair. But it will not be a pleasant process of transition, I think, for a lot of protocols. But it's necessary, and so I just want it to be over with, and so we can increase that standard of professionalism and accountability in the space, I think, and it'll do wonders for our reputation, both domestically and globally. Okay, so for everybody listening, we didn't talk a ton about actual news today. We are a live show, Monday to Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. We're on every venue, soon to be on Apple podcasts, but we're on Spotify, we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter live video, Twitter Spaces. We're every day, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. It's live, so we make a lot of mistakes, have a lot of gaffes, but it's a lot of fun. On Monday, we have a special guest, Ron Hammond, from the Blockchain Association, to talk a lot about regulation and some of the bills that came out of markup and were passed to go now to the House floor. We're going to talk about that. Ron's an amazing dude, so if you're bored, Monday's a great time. Even if you're not bored, it's probably going to be a great time to tune in. And generally Monday, we also do a quick crypto weekend roundup, and we do that so that you guys can all go and touch grass on the weekend. So it's supposed to be hot in America. I don't know about everywhere else, but enjoy the sun. Everybody take some time, get some fresh air, and we got you covered on Monday. We'll keep you up to date with all the stuff that's going on. Mikhail, any final thoughts, my man?
Just keep building. Stick around. This is going to be getting a lot of fun. So appreciate the time, JD.
Beauty. Thanks so much for joining, my friend. It's always a pleasure to have you. We will definitely have you back soon. And with that, today I say to you, Mikhail, go FUD yourself.
Take care.
Later, guy. Later.